whatever you guys want to talk about. Yes, sir.
I noticed in the dedication that was read, it says that all religions, spiritual practices seem to pursue the same universal truth. I'm wondering if you could just sort of briefly fill us in on what that universal truth is.
Sure, I will do my best. So the first thing that I think we should mention is that it's the mystics of all of the great religious traditions that we find the intersubjective concordance. So it's not the exoteric believers necessarily. So there are fundamentalists of different traditions that will never get along with each other. And the theologians, even within a certain tradition, argue and argue and argue about fine points and so forth. So, for instance, in Buddhism, there is the Yogacara school, which is the mind-only school, and that one of the fundamental principles of mind-only Buddhism is that everything is mind. And in the Madhyamaka school, they would take a little bit of, they would say, well, the thing is, you don't want to call it mind because actually what you want to say is that it's empty of intrinsic existence, and then they talk about all of these different kinds of levels of what they call emptiness or shunyata, which mind only believes in too, but they come into this much more finer philosophical detail. And then, of course, there's divisions of Madhyamaka too, and then they argue about this and they argue about that, right? So the point, though, is that fundamentally in Buddhism, the point of Buddhism is to awaken to your true nature. And that's agreed with in all schools of Buddhism. Buddhism is a little bit easier to look at and see, oh, there's a mystical undercurrent, because you see it in that it's much more continuous through the philosophies up till now. Some of the Christian schools it's a little bit harder to find, especially in Protestantism, because there's no idea of sainthood, generally speaking, right? But in the Quaker tradition, for instance, they would go into mystical states, and they would have direct experience of divinity. So anyway, the point is, the mystics of all the traditions have a concordance, have an agreement. And what is it that they agree on? Well, the first thing they agree on is that there is a truth, and as Jesus said, this truth, if you know it, if you come to a gnosis of it, meaning a direct understanding of it, it will set you free. It will make you free. And free, and what he says is free from the wages of sin, which are suffering and death. So free from suffering and death, that's a pretty good truth. So the mystics all agree that there's something like that, that can be known, and we might even go so far as to say is that that's sort of the point of life, is to come to knowledge of this. And but they also agree that you can't say what it is. So this is the eternal problem, is that you can't speak it. And it's because, just like I was talking about earlier, it transcends the distinctions that the mind creates. And the mind is what we use for speech, is what we use for language, for communication. So all speech ultimately will fall short of indicating this truth, which is partly why there's so many different attempts. Because if it was really easy to just say, oh, it's like mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2 or something, then we'd be, okay, let's go home, we're all done, Instead, we have all of this mystical poetry, we have all of these different practices, a lot of which are embedded in the cultures that they came from, but now we have the internet, and we have all of this stuff out there, and nonetheless, doesn't matter how many YouTube satsang videos you watch, it won't wake you up, right? You have to actually come to this gnosis on your own. Does that kind of answer your question? I can talk a little bit more about what the truth indicates. So let's use Buddhist terminology. So emptiness means, it doesn't mean a void, like a blackness or a nothingness. It means that there isn't a separation inherent in any form, and that includes yourself. So it means that, this is Joel's favorite object, the gong. The gong is not separate from the awareness of the gong. You can't take gongness outside of awareness. If I hide it from you, you have an image in your mind of the gong, but the visual experience of the gong is gone. The gong is gone. And now it's here. So the awareness of it is requisite for the experience. And this is true for everything. And so what does that mean? That means that nothing is separate from consciousness. And so the main problem that we have is that we believe that we are somehow a separate entity looking out at an alien world. And that is what we call the subject-object duality. So all mystics agree that fundamentally, in order to be free, that subject-object duality has to collapse. And the problem is that at the very core of that, we have a defense structure. Modern terms, we like to call it our ego, but whatever you want to call it, it's essentially there is some primordial part of us that doesn't believe that believes that we're separate. In Sanskrit, they call it the Hridaya Granthi. It means the knot of the heart. And this knot is what chains spirit and matter, you could say. So consciousness is a modern term for spirit, essentially. It came into use around the time that spirit fell out of use, when the Cartesian revolution took over and science and spirit became separate endeavors, and religion got pushed to the side as technology took over. So consciousness is our modern term for what you could say is spirit, or the sacred dimension of our being, which is the fundamental dimension. So this is what the mystics say, is that this is the fundamental dimension. And everything else is sort of a perception or a creation out of that. And what we want to do is come back into a conscious awareness that that is really what's here. That's really what's going on. And that's what mysticism is about. As opposed to religious practice, which could be about a lot of things. It could be about supporting community. It could be about continuing cultural and artistic traditions. It could be about doing good works, like going and helping people that had their houses damaged in the hurricane. Mysticism is fundamentally the core of these religions. That's why we use this image here, that you might say the founders, at the very least, had gnosis of, and that's sort of the divine inspiration that is at the beginning or the onset of most traditions, or all of the great religious traditions. And generally speaking, you can find that thread, even if it's very hidden, throughout all these traditions. And some is easier than others. Okay, that was my attempt. How did I do?
Let's go home.
It's a good question. It's very foundational. It's like, what are we doing here at the Center for Sacred Sciences? Yes, that's what we're doing here. And then the last thing is that mystics give us practices, because you can't just think your way into freedom. You have to sort of fall backwards into it somehow. You have to discover it. It's a process of discovery. And so practices are designed to train our attention to find this. It's sort of like, I've seen a cartoon, or different versions of it actually, where there's the two fish, and they're like, I heard the old fish over there, he's talking about this water stuff. What's this water stuff? He's crazy, right? So we're swimming in it. You can't get away from it. Everything that you experience is arising in consciousness. There's never a time, could you ever remember a time that you weren't conscious? You can have an idea of a time that you weren't conscious, or you can talk to people and they say, yeah, you were passed out dead cold on the floor last night. But that's not your experience. Your experience is that there was the world, and then there was a sinking into some kind of non-world experience, and then there might be a kind of a break in your memory, and then there maybe was dream phenomena and so forth, and then waking phenomena. But there was never a time where you weren't conscious. Go look at your own experience. This is actually a very important thing to look at. This is a key practice, really, is to watch the states of waking and dream and sleep. But in order to have the attention to do that, we need to do some practice when we're awake. We need to do some, meaning in the waking state. We need to do some meditation or similar things like mantra or something. So I've done a lot of meditation. Obviously, we do that here at the center. Also a lot of Tai Chi and Qigong. Some people do like sacred music, also training attention, or mantra. My wife Hiromi has been getting into writing chants. So she's borrowed a harmonium, and she'll take a phrase that she likes from one of the old mystics or Joel or something, and then she'll come up with a melody. It's a fantastic practice. So the practices are what I think sets mysticism in general as a tradition apart, although there's many different traditions of it, but apart from the exoteric religious practitioners. And we could just go back to meditating, because that's really what it's all about, right?
I have one you can talk about.
Sure, yes, please.
So I've been looking at anger lately, and we have, here at the center, we've talked about actually two that I've practices about anger. One is transforming afflicted emotion that we work on, and the other is sending and taking.
Okay.
And I just wondered if, I don't know, if you could say something about what if they don't work?
What if they don't? Okay, so there's three things to talk about, because some people here are not familiar with transforming afflicted emotions, so I should briefly mention what that is. And some people here are not familiar with sending and taking, so I should mention what that is. And then we'll talk about what practices are designed to do provisionally and ultimately. Okay, so transforming afflicted emotions comes from actually both of these practices come from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. They've given us a lot of fantastic practices. So the idea behind transforming anger is that first you have to enter into a state of spacious awareness. So you have to let your consciousness kind of open. Because if you don't, you won't be able to deal with the energies of anger without getting distracted by your thoughts about why you're angry. So the first thing about why it doesn't work generally is because you're not spacious enough. So if you're trying to transform afflicted emotions and you're, God damn it, that guy really cut me off. No, you have to kind of let it go first, open. And so that, we have specific practices to help us cultivate spacious awareness, but we won't get into that right now. So you're in a state of somewhat open, spacious awareness. Then you drop the story about that guy that cut me off, meaning you have to let the thought conclude, and then you go to the feeling itself. What does it feel like? So for me, anger is usually down in here, pushing up. It's like, wah, I want to explode. Do something. It's the energy of, it propels us. For instance, and it can be very useful. So anger isn't itself a problem. This is the thing about transforming emotions, is that the energy isn't the problem. What's the problem is our resistance, our attachment, or our pushing it away, or our acting out on it based on some delusion that there's somebody out there that is the reason, and therefore they must be punished, or whatever. So we drop the story, we go to the energy, and then we let ourselves feel it. And this is the hard part. This is the part that we don't want to do. The last thing we want to do is feel how furious we are. Because that's the problem, right? We want to fix the furiousness. We want to fix the rage. We want to do something other than feel, right? So that's the trick. That's the real challenge. If you're spacious, then you actually have the space to feel.
So you're talking about feeling that not in your stomach,
Well, whatever it is.
so whatever your,
Whatever your particular experience of this energy is. And it could be in your throat, it could be in your ears. It's about being honest and naked with your own experience. Okay?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
yeah. I think that probably the hardest part is letting go of the story.
Yes. So there's this 3 steps. Spacious, let go of the story, feel what you're feeling, and then that's it. That's the other thing. Then we want to do something about it. We're still hooked in. Like, okay, I did all the steps. Now what can I do to fix this? No. That's not the instruction. It's like the meditation, People always think there should be more to it. Sit down, get comfortable and upright, and watch your breath. And then what? No, that's it. Wait till the gong rings. Because that's actually the training. Okay? So putting yourself in a position where you now are feeling what you're feeling, maybe for the first time in a long time, or maybe the first time so thoroughly. That's a great gift. So it also requires a little bit of faith, because we have to have the faith that maybe the world isn't the way our mind is telling us it is. It's the story that's going, right, that is propelling us to believe that we must do something in response to this anger. Or somebody else is at fault for how I'm feeling, or all of these, right, these kinds of, either I'm the victim or somebody else is the victim and I must be the righteous savior or whatever.
Well, all that energy, that energy is just pushing to act out.
Yes.
It's just like,
So, yes, it is. And it might be that you will end up acting in some way. But if you're acting from anger, that can cause harm. The energy itself is powerful, but not necessarily injurious. If you're coming from that story of, this is why I should feel angry, I think that's when a lot of harm is caused. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, we talked about one of the 3 parts of your question.
Where's the transforming part?
So, okay, you're right, thank you. So what happens is you recognize the energy of anger nakedly. And in Tibetan, they say that anger is the wisdom energy of clarity. That includes, it's all aversion. So that includes fear. Because when we're angry or when we're scared, it's like we're awake. You're not sleepwalking through anger, right? You're wide awake with it. It makes you present. You're extremely focused. So whatever the thing that made you angry, it's in your awareness. It's like you spend 10 minutes trying to stay with your breath and you can't. It's hard, right? But if you're angry, it's easy. So that's why it's clarity. Now imagine if you had that same clarity, but you did not have the distinction between subject and object. That person over there and, harmed me. So that's the opportunity for the transformation into that wide open field of open awareness. Thank you, Jane. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay. All right. So sending and taking is another Tibetan practice where you open to the experience of the suffering of yourself or other beings, and you breathe that suffering in. Often the image is thick black smoke into the heart. And again, you have to start with spaciousness. So this is an open, expansive awareness that is not, if the foundation is choiceless awareness. So it's not choosing to focus on any one particular field of consciousness. Everything is grist for our mill in spacious awareness. So we're in spaciousness, And we become aware, or we might do this as a guided meditation or as a purposeful meditation for the suffering of other beings. So actually, you know what? This would be a good one to do. So let's all do this. So let's close our eyes. This one you could do with your eyes closed. It's a visualization. So you close your eyes. So first, just become aware of your body, all the different kinds of sensations in your body. And then become aware of your hearing. We're going to do this kind of rapido, a little fast, but just so you get the idea, get a little taste of it. Become aware of your hearing. So you hear my voice. You feel your body. And we're going to just skip sight, because I'm going to do this with the eyes closed. But if you had your eyes open, you would be also including the sight field, any smells or tastes, hopefully no perfume. You heard what Rick said about no perfume. And then the thought field. So notice that as I speak, you have thoughts. You might be just hearing my voice, or you might be commenting, your mind might be commenting. Just be aware of that. And just relax into these different aspects of your experience. The 5 senses and the field of thought make 6. And now bring to mind somebody that you care about, that you believe to be suffering right now. And, go through the story a little bit. Like, why is this person suffering? What's going on with them? Really try to get a visceral impression of how they are suffering, what they might be feeling, what it's like to be them. And make it as vividly apparent in your mind's eye as you can. And see if you can't feel it also. Feel either their suffering or your compassion for their suffering. And now go to that naked feeling. Drop the story. Just feel that. What does it feel like? In your body sensation field. Maybe you feel it in your pit of your stomach or your throat, wherever. Now, as you breathe in, imagine that suffering entering into your heart space, center of your being, which is infinite. There is no limit to the space of consciousness in your heart. And so this thick black smoke enters, and it is transformed into light. The light of love and compassion. And as you breathe out that light to your suffering friend, along with the wish that they be free of the causes and conditions of their suffering and enjoy limitless joy, peace, and happiness. And we just coordinate that with the breath, breathing in the suffering and breathing out love and compassion. And then finally, finish with a heartfelt wish or prayer that all beings may be free of suffering and enjoy limitless joy, peace, and happiness. So, how do you think that practice helps with anger?
So that was me. I did the suffering was me, the emotion, the suffering was anger, and the transformation was my anger in that smoke.
Fantastic. Did it work?
It did a little bit.
Oh, good. Imagine that.
That was
Can I get an amen?
That was a little more, that was more effective for me than the transforming afflictive emotion.
Good. So, I mean, that's the thing. We have all of these, well, at the center we have a lot of practices, actually. You know, Joel's textbook, or his practice manual, has lots of practices in it. And there's many, many more. And I teach Qigong in the mornings here that is another kind of practice that can be useful. But not one practice is going to be right for every person in every situation. That's why there's more than one. So it's like a toolkit. And you want to learn to be facile with the tools that you learn to use. But you also don't want to just learn so many that you never get good at any of them. So it's kind of an art, you know, it's, there's a science to it. The Center for Sacred Sciences is definitely, there are methods that work, that are reproducible and teachable. But everybody has to kind of come to it on their own with their own proclivity and their own aptitude, and it changes too. Sometimes one kind of practice is going to work, and then eventually maybe it won't. You'll have to find something else. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes, sir.
I feel like I want to add another word to this. We see suffering as the carrying of anger. The other word is karma. The result of it being carried is that it then issues in your actions and affects other people.
That's true.
So the reason to transform it is not just to avoid your own suffering, but to stop this line of causation.
Yes, good point.
And one reason to look at the anger is often we're carrying anger from our experiences, maybe childhood experiences and so on, and they teach that, well, this anger didn't just pop into your head for the heck of it. There was a reason for it. And Thich Nhat Hanh points out that, suffering tends to get passed on.
Yes.
And then, so your children wind up with this case of anger or something, which then issues in their life, affecting their choices and the people around them and so on.
Yes.
So that's the other reason, suffering on one hand and the karmic transmission of it to others.
So yes, at the center we usually use the generic term conditioning as a way of indicating what the word karma means. Karma means action in Sanskrit, so it means a volitional action technically. So action done with the thought that I'm doing this. And that type of activity is conditioning. It creates conditioning, it creates like patterns, ruts, and so forth. And so you're right, to be free, it means to be free from karma, be free from conditioning, which also means to be free from action or volitional action, which means having the space for spontaneous action, having the space for free action, free movement. And when you're coming from freedom, then the intrinsic love and compassion of the universe can act through you. So it's not about knowing exactly. This is why I was looking forward to doing a questions and answers day. It's because that way I don't have to pretend that I know what I should say. It can be completely free, completely responsive. I can come here with a completely blank mind instead of trying to come up with something clever. Then if it's clever, great. If it's not, great, whatever. But the point is that it's free action. So hopefully from love and compassion. One other thing I just want to briefly touch, that's a very big subject, the idea of how our conditioning is passed on to us and how we want to end that pattern, because that touches on global suffering and the history of war and et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of goes into a big subject. But briefly, I think a big part of what we're doing is clearing our body and mind from all of this patterning that isn't us fundamentally. It isn't what we are, because we are this consciousness. So the patterning is an overlay. And so I think that, and everybody's unique. Nobody has this is what Joel used to always say. He says, like, everybody's delusion is absolutely unique. Everybody's true nature is completely the same. But everybody's delusion is unique. And so our path, therefore, is going to be unique. It's not going to be the same. It's going to be different. The themes are going to be similar. The fundamental realization is the same, but the path is different. And that's why different practices suit different people. And also, I think it's why it's important not to throw out psychological approaches and body healing methods and all of these other kinds of auxiliary things that can be very useful. Shamanic methods. So there's a lot out there that can help people get free of conditioning. And that's, I think, a big part of what we're doing. Does that make sense? I want to get back to the third part of your question. The third part was, what if the practices don't work? What if the practices don't work? So there's two basic levels to answer that question. The first is kind of provisional, which we already touched upon. Different practices might work for different people at different times, and that's why we learn different approaches, and we can hopefully pull something out that will work. But ultimately, spiritual practice is designed to fail. Because we are the reality seeking the reality. And the only way for us to fully fall into our reality, which we've always had, is to fail at seeking. Because as long as we're seeking, we're still there as a separate ego trying to attain union with the absolute. But there only is the absolute. So we're sort of stuck. It's like a chicken or the egg thing. So, here at the Center for Sacred Sciences, we give up the secret right off the bat. So we're not about stringing you along, you know what I mean? So the truth is, you are that which you're seeking. So let's all go home. No, I'm just kidding. So
Say more.
say more. So that's why ultimately practices are designed to fail. What they're designed to do is to exhaust your effort. Now, this is nice to hear, right? Oh, good. That means that I don't have to practice. Well, not exactly. Because as long as you're making any kind of effort in your life at all, you're practicing something. You're practicing seeking happiness in a fifth cup of coffee. That would be, if I had coffee here, it would be a fifth cup, but I like coffee. Or, a better job, or a different relationship, or a different thought. I didn't like that thought. I want to have a different thought. Do you see what I'm saying? So the fundamental delusion is so deep. In Joel's book, he says it's the first distinction. And the first distinction gives rise to three things: loneliness, longing, and fear. So if you're experiencing loneliness, if you're experiencing longing, and if you're experiencing fear, then you haven't completely seen through that first distinction. And there could be layers to this. In my experience, there's layers to this. I think everybody's different that way as far as how they wake up.
Do that again. If you're not experiencing...
If you're experiencing loneliness, longing, and fear in your life, and then you go, well, Matt said I don't have to practice anymore. No, that's not what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So, and a lot of teachers out there are saying, your seeking is your bondage, give up the search, just be free, right? So we have those teachings out there. They're out there now. And those are like the last 5 seconds of the path. It's true. I mean, eventually you'll get to the point where that's true. You drop every vestige of seeking, but that means seeking completely. And then what can happen is spontaneity. Completely, not just spiritual seeking, all seeking, all sense of unsatisfactoriness. And what is that like? Well, you can't say what that's like. You can't say what that's like. But let's put it this way: the subject-object distinction, right? It's not that you don't see it arise, but you know it's an illusion. There isn't a separate world out there and a separate being in here. You have an experience of that is more real than real. That experience, that sense of a duality is seen to be a play. It's a game. It's like the divine play. So this is the other side of it, is that when there's no loneliness, longing, and fear, then there's Shanti, Nanda, and free Shakti. So there's a peace, bliss, and unimpeded movement of energy. So that's the positive side of it, which we often don't want to talk about because then people get attached to aspects of that and chase, become bliss junkies and that kind of thing. But so does that make sense? That there's a fundamental need for a falling away of seeking, but you can't do that. You have to exhaust it because you are the separate individual experience is the seeking at the beginning, very beginning.
Like what Joel says, you need to use the floor to get up.
That's right. So we've fallen into delusion at a time before memory. And so we use what we're experiencing to push ourselves up. And that's what practices are about. And study and contemplation and all of that.
So I could take this anger and I could exhaust through whatever these practices are, maybe both of them or whatever, knowing that I'm not ever going to transform this anger. I'm just going to keep trying.
Well, you can transform the anger. You can. But what you can't do is will yourself into limitless joy, peace, and happiness. So transforming the anger is it's a technique, and it can take us to profound insight, actually. So it's totally worth doing it, and try and see what happens, or do the sitting and taking if that one seems to be more, useful. The point is, if you're suffering, you want to go into the suffering. You want your attention to become interested in the suffering, because that's where the potential for transformation is, not outside, not somewhere else. So whatever method, it could just be bare naked attention. It doesn't matter. But it's about the radical about face. The mystics say a couple different places. In the Shinchen Ming, which is the faith mind inscription, it's a old Zen text, it says, you must instantaneously invert the illumination. So there's a turning about. Another way it's put is turning about at the seat of consciousness. That's only going to happen if you look at your own suffering. Deborah, you had your hand up.
There's sort of a side wonder when you said this happens in the last 5 seconds of the path. I've always wondered if whether you were on a path of seeking or not, whether in the last 5 seconds of your life this would happen. I can't experiment with that, but I'm just wondering if that yet, and then I won't be able to come back and report on it. I don't know, but it's just wild wondering.
Yeah, so it's generally accepted amongst mystics that death is a golden opportunity for awakening. However, it's also generally accepted that you die how you live. I think that's from the people I've talked to who've spent a lot of time in hospice and stuff, that's what they've seen. So we should start practicing now. There's no time to lose. And then, yes, when your hour approaches, if you are prepared, what a great opportunity. In fact, Joel has a book on this. It's called Through Death's Gate, if you're not familiar with it. It's available for, you can buy paperback copies in the library, and there's, I don't know if, Tom, is there a PDF or a Kindle edition now? There's a Kindle edition and it's free. And there's also an audio edition, I believe, a spoken word version. So anyway, it gives you basic practices for preparing for and during the time of death. And the reason why it's such a powerful opportunity is because the world will be taken away from you, and your body will be taken away from you, and all that will be left is consciousness. In the Tibetan tradition, they say that what happens is there's a dissolving process that essentially follows the most exterior of the senses, and then gets all the way down to, I think, hearing is the last, and then maybe some sort of a perception of some lights. And then there's what they call the black light of near attainment. And that's the opportunity. It's essentially the same state as deep sleep. That's the opportunity to recognize the luminosity of consciousness. So if you recognize the black light of near attainment as your own nature, it becomes the clear light of consciousness. It is the clear light of consciousness already, but you have to recognize that. And so what is that? Well, you go there every night when you go into deep sleep. So if you can practice becoming aware in deep sleep, that's a good practice for death. It's a good subject, but it's, it would be hard to test, wouldn't it? Although, as an aside, there is a sci-fi TV show out there where this crazy guy has these people in the basement, and he's making them die and then bringing them back and seeing what happens. So, what is that one called? You know what I'm talking about. The OA. The OA, yes. Yes, pretty freaky stuff. Anyway, I don't recommend trying that. Not a good method, definitely not one the mystics have passed down. I can feel it bubbling up to the surface of consciousness. The next question. Or we could go back to meditating.
I think we're calling your bluff.
Are you? Okay. I can do standing meditation. Yes.
Just as an addendum to what you were answering questions about conditioning, I was thinking about Pema Chodron's perspective of our innocence. I wondered if you might speak to that, our innocence concerning this.
Yes. So I'm not, familiar specifically with, that aspect of Pema Chodron's teachings, but I know what she's talking about. So Pema Chodron is a contemporary Tibetan Buddhist teacher based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, I believe. Yeah. And she was a student of Chogyam Trungpa. Anyway, she's got a lot of books out, very popular, and good stuff. And so the idea here, innocence. So like I was talking about with this gentleman, our conditioning is not us. It's something that's come upon us. And our fundamental innocence is our fundamental true nature, which is pure, which is unsullied. In the Tibetan tradition, they use the idea of a diamond. The mind, the consciousness, or the true nature of mind is like a diamond. It's the hardest substance, meaning it's impervious, can't be hurt. And it also has a quality of clarity, like the light shining through it and that kind of stuff too. So not only are we innocent, we're also I don't like the word invulnerable, but we're not capable of being sullied. You know, no matter what happens to us, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how bad things were, your true nature is fundamentally pure. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that gives you the excuse to act out your negative conditioning. It gives you the potential and the responsibility to purify your negative conditioning. But also with that knowledge that ultimately this is not me. And so what that requires then is that we cultivate a mind, an awareness, attention that's able to see when things like anger arise, when things like fear arise, greed, jealousy, all of the negative emotions, and instead of acting them out, that we seek a remedy. Either at the very beginning, we just force ourselves not to act out on it. And then later we start doing things like transforming it or making reparations is another thing. You know, in the AA, you know, they have the, what is it, step, towards the end, they, you know, you 9, thank you. You make amends. It's a very good thing to do. And that's something that Hiromi and her group, she's teaching a group where it's 11 months to live. So one of the practitioners groups here this year. And so the idea is, if you only had 11 months to live, what would you do? And here's a bunch of things, a lot of practices. And one of the things is making amends with those that you have unfinished business with, if possible, and so forth. And that's, of course, depends. You know, some people you don't ever need to talk to again. You shouldn't. You know, they cause you a lot of suffering, and you've cut yourself off from them. But sometimes this is very useful. So, and you know, that freedom that I was talking about comes from that innocence. And another aspect of it is that the mind doesn't have to know what the next thing is that's going to happen, or that's going to be said, or that's going to be done, and so forth. And this starts to fall into that experience of faith, right? Part of our problem is that we're always trying to control what's going to happen. And that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that we can't control what's going to happen. So we're constantly fighting, and that's that extra resistance that binds up the energy, binds up our life force. Is that somebody over here had? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but can you say anything about how lucid dreaming might get one towards that state of realizing that blackness is
Yes.
Leading to the light?
Yes, let's talk about that. That's a good subject. Now, first of all, I'm going to admit I am not a good lucid dreaming practitioner. There are people out there that are really good at it and put a lot of effort into it. I haven't put a lot of effort into it. I'm probably, if I spent enough time, I might be able to. But I do know the teachings. In fact, we were just given the teachings. We had the Practices of the Night lecture. I think it was the second night on a retreat. And another caveat is I do often experience myself in deep sleep just prior to waking up. I have the experience of that clear light. This has happened after my awakening. I started having that more and more, that kind of experience. So I know what the clear light of mind is like in deep sleep. I know what that experience is like. So lucid dreaming is a way of, does everybody know what lucid dreaming is? Basically, you're dreaming and you know you're dreaming. And there are degrees of it. So you might kind of know you're dreaming and then kind of get distracted. Or you might really know you're dreaming and be like, what is going on? Everything seems so real. And I know I'm dreaming. This is crazy. And I have had some lucid dreams, you know, and in my lucid dreams, I was always like, okay, I'm going to fly now, you know. This is cool, right? So the Tibetans have a lot of teachings on these. Namkhai Norbu has a book called like Dream Yoga and the Practice of the Natural Light. We have that in the library. That's a very good book on this exact subject. So the idea is that if you are dreaming and you know you're dreaming, then you should practice. You should practice your spiritual practice. And one of the most important things or useful things you can do is to perceive objects and notice how real they are. Touch them, feel them, smell them, taste them, all with the knowledge that you're in a dream. Because the same impermanence and emptiness that you experience in the dream is also true in waking life. It's just a more persistent illusion. So if you can begin to have these experiences in the dreaming life, it predisposes you to recognizing the emptiness of objects in waking life. So that's one of the first things. As far as recognizing the clear light, this is a difficult practice, but the idea is that you dissolve the dream, or allow the dream to dissolve, and stay lucid. And then you will be in the deep sleep state, which is the clear light. So there are different techniques in the Tibetan tradition for doing that, but the main thing is to maintain continuity of awareness into that state. Does that make sense? Yeah. So those two things. It's much more difficult to dissolve the dream into the deep sleep state than it is to go, oh my goodness, this is so real. What the heck? It's really very useful practice because we take our waking state to be, the materialism of it to be a fact. We just, unconsciously always take it to be a fact. It's very difficult, especially in this culture, I think. In some cultures, like in the Aboriginal culture, the dream state for them was the more real state, the dream time. And the waking state was, a couple steps removed from the world of spirit. The world of spirit is where you go when you die, and that's real. The real state. And our life here is like a long dream. And Ramana Maharshi, the Hindu sage, he said the same thing. He said, there's no difference fundamentally between the waking state and the dreaming state, except one is longer. So. Yeah, Barbara.
It has to do with lucid dreaming, but I had some time ago. I had a dream, but I daren't call it a lucid dream or anything because it seems to diminish it. Because of the nature of it and the clarity of it. And my clarity of it, it's still with me, and it still partners my life, or is embedded in my life, embodied in my life. The words are just, they just roll out. But and so when we talk about lucid dreaming, I don't have a question here. I'm just trying to figure it out. But it is, to me, it has been the most profound, that period of time, the memory of it, or the feel of it, the actual seeing of it, has been one of the most profound things that's ever happened to me.
Yes, and I think this is true. I've had a lot of dreams that were more real than real. Well, I wouldn't say a lot. I've had a handful of dreams that were more real than real, that I couldn't forget if I wanted to, and that were essentially milestones on my path, very important aspects of my path. And I've also had visions like that too, non-ordinary experiences that stick with me. Yeah. So I think it's wrong to discount dreams. And Joel's a big believer in dream practice, and he used to run dream groups where you would, I was in the last one he ever did. I was lucky to be able to join that. And a small group of people, you track your dreams every night, and you meet once a week for like 3 months and report what happened. And because what happens is the dreams, if you do this, they'll start talking to you, and they do it in themes. So your particular theme structure is going to be unique. I mean, there's those dream books that say, oh, well, the lake is always this kind of thing, and an ocean's always this kind of thing, and a tower is this kind of thing. Well, those, there are archetypes that are true, they'll show up in different people's dreams to mean similar things or the same kind of thing. But when you really start tracking your dreams, you start to learn the specific language of your dream life, which is a very interesting thing.
It's not a confusing thing but what bothers me is language, I guess. It's like we have a word and we use it and it's called a lucid dream. It's a dream. And I'm part of this culture and I use it. And so it feels as if when I'm using it, it doesn't describe the reality.
The Tibetans make a distinction between ordinary dreams and dreams of clarity. So dreams of clarity are coming from beyond your personal little kind of daily subconscious or whatever. So a lot of dreams are sort of like just house cleaning. This kind of thing happened and, your mind needed to just kind of work it out a little bit. And then every once in a while you'll have a dream that has more what we call archetypal content that has meaning or message beyond your ego. It could be a teaching, or it could be some opening to some level of experience that you aren't ordinarily aware of, that kind of thing. Yeah. So the Tibetans call that a dream of clarity. And I think it's important to distinguish that some dreams are relatively more mundane, just like some thoughts are more mundane, right? And some dreams are profound. And there are ways to cultivate the more profound dreams by doing like dream yoga practice and things like that. But sometimes they just come. I find that on retreat I get some interesting dreams, useful dreams.
They're sometimes called numinous.
Numinous dreams, yeah, this is a beautiful word. Numinous. Yeah. Got time for one or two more?
I hesitate to ask this, but I'm going to anyway.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah. I've had the experience, maybe not as many times as I'd like, but over the last couple of years, maybe half a dozen times, of really feeling connected to the possibility of staying with mindfulness, seeing my conditioning while it's happening, this kind of abiding awareness. And then life seems to take over, and then I wake up and then I go about my day, and days will go by. It's like, oh God, I forgot. I was on it, And then, but sometimes those days will go by, turns into months will go by, and I'm trying to complete like all the things that seem to be in front of me, so I can kind of get back to it. It's really clear to me it's a personal pattern. It's bizarre that I still do this, but so on the one hand, I can see that itself as conditioning, a certain kind of aversion or running away or whatever. But part of me is still taking responsibility for it in a way of not feeling guilty, but like I'm sort of kicking myself in a way. I'm still sort of like nagging myself, like, dude, you're still doing that? Really? And so I just kind of came out of it the other day. Like, oh, okay. So now back into that. But it's happened so many times, I'm just like, almost like waiting for it to wake up. It's like, okay, it's gone again. So I don't know. I can start sitting twice a day, or something. But I just thought I'd throw that out in case you have any sort of like global kinds of observations about the way awareness seems to flux and flow. Even on a meditation retreat, that happens. I'll be deep in, and I'll be sort of. I was just quiet, and then. So I thought maybe something about the nature of mind or something. You might have something helpful to say.
Mm. Can people relate? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I wanted to say that first because it can be really difficult to kind of feel like, my God, I'm alone in this terrible, nightmare I call my own mind. First of all, everybody's different. Everybody's going to come to a deepening into a continuity in their own way. And, some people are more body oriented. Some people are more, have to go experience big events in their life. So, some people are it's just like everybody's cut differently. But fundamentally, you got to get kind of tired of yourself. You kind of got to get to the point where you're just like, your mind isn't going to entertain you anymore. It's like TV shows. Like there's just nothing on. Right? I mean, I could watch that, but I'd rather just go take a nap. It's that boring, unfortunately, and that's what we call the kenosis, or the process of exhausting the will, is that unsatisfactoriness that promotes that initial. I talked about the first distinction. So the loneliness, longing, and fear. What they lead to is restlessness. It leads to restlessness. You're always trying to find the next thing, and that restlessness. What you want to do is you want to bring your attention to what that feels like, because it's not satisfactory. It's not. Every once in a while, your restlessness will get you to that cookie. Now I can rest. But how long does it last? And so this is, that what mindfulness does for us is it gives us, and mindfulness, by the way, is the fruit of meditation, by allowing the mind to come to attention of what's going on in the present moment, we begin to cultivate the awareness of the present moment throughout our day. And then that begins to show us how impermanent things are, and specifically how impermanent the satisfaction derived from worldly things are. Worldly things meaning chasing after the senses, chasing after thoughts. You'll never find rest there. It will always continue to move. And so if you're like, I'm going to do my spiritual practice once I get this and this and this and this and this done, that what you want to do is you want to find out, how can I do my spiritual practice while I'm doing this? While I'm doing this? While I'm doing that? So everything then becomes your practice. That's really, and when that happens, then you're really locked in. Then everything you do becomes an expression of your Dharma. So it's like you begin to flow in the Tao more and more and more. But sometimes we are doing things that can't become spiritual practice because they're fundamentally based on restlessness, or they're fundamentally based on greed or lust or some other terrible driving conditioning that we haven't noticed that's actually behind how we're behaving. And so then we really need to look closely and let that energy surface, and that can be really painful. But once it surfaces, it's like lancing a boil, and then all that energy that went into that can be redistributed. So that's sometimes the case too. So you just need to know, you need to discover where your energy is being diverted, and try to free it up through that laser-like awareness that you're cultivating on your cushion. It's no easy way. I think what often stops people is how painful it is. We think, spiritual practice, right? That's going to make me happy. But the first thing it's going to do is it's going to make you miserable. And maybe for a while. Because you're going to recognize how conditioned you are by all of this shit that isn't even you. So, not to end on a cheery note or anything here. Okay, good. My daughter, Mina, has a question. Yes.
It's kind of going back to topic, but can you talk about sleep paralysis?
Sleep paralysis. So, is this something that happens to you sometimes? No, you're just curious. Okay. I don't know very much about sleep paralysis, but I have, when I was younger, I remember sometimes waking up and not being able to move my body. So I think that can be, it's interesting in one sense in that we assume the waking state is a fixed experience, but actually there's sort of a spectrum there, right? So am I awake or am I asleep? And sometimes I'd wake up and I couldn't move my body, and then I'd be able to get up, and then I'd realize, wait, I'm not awake. I'm still sleeping, right? So I think it's useful in the sense to notice the changes of state and try to become more aware during those changes of state. But spiritually speaking, I don't think sleep paralysis is easy or useful state necessarily to cultivate. But if you do find yourself in that state, I would say instead of getting nervous, just relaxing. Go, oh, interesting. Interesting. What is this? Final question. Okay, I'll just add one more thing. It's worth it, Mark. It's worth it. Walk on, as the Zen master said. Yeah. It's the effort that we put in, even though ultimately we're exhausting our effort, it's this is what it's all about. And it's possible to be free, to have a heart at peace. Okay, until next time, peace to all.